Hello students, welcome to my YouTube channel Dhyani classes. If you are watching my video for the first time, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So in today's video we will cover the third part of the chapter, the address, written by Marga Minko from class 11th CBSE. So let's get started. So in the second part of the chapter, we have seen how the narrator became very sad when she allowed to come inside the house by Mrs. Dowling's daughter because she was unaware why the narrator came there, and then the girl asked her for a cup of tea. So the narrator also saw many things there lying on the floor just like useless items, and musty smell was also coming inside the room where Mrs. Dowling kept all the valuable belongings that belonged to her mother. So on seeing this, she became very surprised and horrified, and now she is talking to Mrs. Dowling's daughter and explaining her each and everything about the thing. And then the girl became very surprised to see how the narrator know everything about these items. And then the girl told the narrator that to go another room where her mother kept other valuable things which she took out from the narrator's mother's house. So let's look at the third part of the chapter, that is final part of the chapter now. Further, she says it was a strange voice as though each sound was different in this room. So when the narrator started talking to herself, it was a strange voice. That means it was very strange voice of tone because she was very sad looking at these belongings, and says as though each sound was different in this room. That means the narrator was explaining everything looking at the different items inside the room. And then the girl says, "Oh, you know about them?" She had turned round and brought me my tea. So immediately the daughter of Mrs. Dowling asked her, "Oh, you know about them?" That means she asked her, "How do you know about these things as you are explaining each and everything looking at the belongings?" And says she laughed. So the narrator started laughing because she understood that the girl does not know from where her mother took out all these valuable and decorative items. And then the girl says, "My mother says it is antique. We have got lots more." She pointed round the room. So the girl told the narrator that my mother says it is antique. That means Mrs. Dowling told her daughter that items have a high value because of its age and quality, and it was also a very old collection, and says we've got lot more. She pointed round the room. So the girl also told the narrator that we have many more such items and that they kept inside another room. So she pointed out that room where her mother kept all the things inside the room. So all these valuable and antique items belong to her mother because Mrs. Dowling used to come to her house and says, "See for yourself." So the girl wanted the narrator to go inside the room and look around by herself. I had no need to follow her hand. I knew which things she meant. So here she is saying that I had no need to follow her hand. That means she doesn't want to follow what the girl had said because the narrator told her that I don't want to say more things because she was feeling very sad, and says I knew which things she meant. That means the narrator understood that why this girl trying to tell her to see another belongings inside the room, and says I just look at the still life over the tea table. As a child I had always fancied the apple on the pewter table. So later on she looked at the still life over the tea table. That means she saw a table on which there was a beautiful painting on the table, and she pasted this beautiful design on the table when she was a child, and says as a child I had always fancied the apple on the pewter table. So when she was a child, she always used to like the picture of an apple on the pewter table. That means there was a bluish grey metal that is made of tin or other hard metal stuffs, and says we used it for everything, she said. So the narrator used to use this pewter table for everything such as eating and serving food and all, and says once we even ate off the plates hanging there on the wall. So she is talking about the beautiful and decorative plates in which they used to serve the food, and after washing it they used to hang on the wall. So she understood that these decorative plates were also belonged to her mother. Further she says I wanted to so much, but it wasn't anything special. I had found the burn mark on the tablecloth. So here the narrator is saying that I wanted to find more items that belongs to her mother, and says but I wasn't anything special. That means she was not able to find out what she wanted to find. So she keeps searching for more things and says, I had found the mark on the tablecloth. That means she was able to find burnt mark on the tablecloth, and she was certain that this tablecloth belonged to her mother as well. And now, as she was looking at each items inside the house or inside the room, the girl wanted to say something to the narrator and says, the girl looked questioningly at me. So as the narrator explains so much about all these things, because these things belong to her mother, and says the girl looked questioningly at me. That means the girl looked at her very strangely, because she was surprised how the narrator was able to talk so much all about these items, and says, yes, I said, you get so used to touching all these lovely things in the house, you hardly look at them anymore. So the narrator starts telling the girl that you get used to touching all these lovely things in the house. That means she explained to her that you become so used to your precious things, and you know very well that these things are far away from you. And once you get in touch with these items, you will start realizing it when these things are missing from the house, or when you have given to somebody that these things are not there. You only notice when something is missing because it has to be repaired, or because you have lent it, for example. So here she is saying that you only notice when something is missing. That means you will feel the importance once you lost the precious things, or when something is missing from the house or kept somewhere else, and says it has to be repaired, or because you have lent it. So the narrator tries to make the girl understand that all these precious and valuable items belongs to her mother, and Mrs. Darling took out all these items from her house, and that's why she knew so much about these things, and says, again I heard the unnatural sound of my voice, and I went on. I remember my mother once asked me if I would help her polish the silver. So the narrator again heard the unnatural sound of my voice. That means again she became very frightened, and she became very sad, and her voice was shaking and trembling because of the past memories, telling something that to the girl that I remember my mother once asked me if I would help her polish the silver. So she's trying to tell the girl that once her mother told her to polish all these silver belongings. So in this way she is trying to tell the girl that all these decorative and old fashioned things belong to her mother, and says, it was a very long time ago, and I was probably bored that day, or perhaps I had to stay at home because I was ill, as she had never asked me before. So the narrator is saying that it was very long time ago, and I was probably bored on that day. That means she was all alone in that house on that day, and she was getting bored, and she was ill on that day as well. So her mother told her to stay at home only. So on that day her mother told her to polish the silver spoons or plates because she was at home, and says other than she never asked her before to stay home or to polish the silver. So she told the girl that still I remembered that these things belongs to her mother. Further she says, I asked her which silver she meant, and she replied, surprised, that it was the spoons, forks and knives of course. So later on the girl asked her which silver she meant. That means she was showing different kinds of spoons from the cartons, and the narrator told her that yes, that was the spoon, forks and knives of course which she used to polish when these items were in her house, and says, and that was the strange thing, I didn't know the cutlery we ate of every day was silver. So the narrator became very surprised because the girl showed her very strange thing, and it was a cutlery, and she never knew that the cutlery was made of silver, and she never knew how precious these items were. And says, the girl laughed again, I bet you don't know it is either. I looked intently at her. So the girl saw that the narrator was surprised, and looking at the girl she started laughing and told the narrator that I bet you don't know it is either. That means she showed her other precious things as well, and that she was not sure that the narrators don't know these valuable things because the girl was unaware of the past that her mother used to visit the narrator's house and took out all these items from her house. So the narrator looked intently. That means she looked at her eagerly, and says, what we eat with, she asked. So the girl also asked her that whether the spoon or forks that she ate with were also made of silver or not. Well, do you know, she hesitated. So here the girl also wanted to show something to the narrator, and she was also hesitating a little bit because she was not sure whatever she wanted to show the narrator, and says, she walked to the sideboard and wanted to open a drawer. I look, it's in here. I jumped up. So she walked to the sideboard where her mother kept something, and then she opened a drawer and told her that it was in there, and then the narrator jumped up to see what was there. So there was a silver cutlery that they had kept inside the sideboard because it was a valuable thing, and says, I was forgetting the time, I must catch my train. She had her hand on the drawer. Don't you want to wait for my mother? No, I must go. So as the narrator was busy looking at her belongings, and suddenly she remembered that I was forgetting the time. That means she was getting late to go back to her house, and thought I must catch my train. And she had her hand on the drawer and told the narrator that don't you want to wait for my mother? That means she wanted the narrator to wait for her mother, but in reply she said, no, I must go. So she was getting late and she thought, I must catch my train, otherwise she will not be able to reach her home on time. Further she says, I walked to the door, the girl pulled the drawer open. So as the narrator started coming out of the room to go back to the railway station because she was getting late, and suddenly the girl pulled the drawer open. That means the girl started opening the door of the drawer because the narrator was not there at that time, and says, I can find my own way. As I walked down to the passage, I heard the jingling of spoons and forks. So the narrator came out of the house and walked down the passage. She heard the jingling of spoons and forks. That means she heard a jingling sound coming from the forks. So she could hear the sound when she was coming down the passage, and says, at the corner of the road, I looked up at the nameplate, Marconi Street. It said I had been at number 46. So when she came out of the house at the corner of the road, I looked up at the nameplate. That means once again she looked at the nameplate and it was Marconi Street number 46, and says the address was correct. So she was very sad because of the past memories of her mother, and she knew all the things belonged to her mother. So again she looked at the nameplate for the last time and thought the address was correct given by her mother, and that was Marconi Street number 46. But now I didn't want to remember it anymore. So while walking on the road, she says, but now I didn't want to remember it anymore. That means she didn't want to visit this place again because these things were inside the house that belongs to her mother, and that makes her sad, and says, I wouldn't go back there because the objects that are linked in your memory with the familiar life of former times instantly lose their value when served from them. You see them again in a strange surrounding. So she didn't want to go back that place again where her mother's memories is still alive because of the object that were lying all around inside Mrs. Darling's house, which belonged to her mother, and now these items have become useless because her mother is no more and there is no use of these valuable things, and says you see them again in strange surrounding. So she was feeling very sad because of the way her mother's belongings were lying on the floor, and thought if she tried to get these items back to her house, they would bring back the memories. So she didn't want to go back to that place again. Further she says, and what should I have done with them in a small rented room where the shred of black out paper still hung along the windows, and no more than a handful of cutlery fitted in the narrow table drawer. So in the end she is saying that what should I have done with them in a small rented room. That means the narrator is still living in a small rented room, and she doesn't want to bring back these items or these things because she had a small rented room where she was living, and says the shred of blackout paper still hung along the windows, and no more than a handful of cutlery fitted the narrow table drawer. That means she had a small table there, and she already had a small set of cutlery fitted to the table drawer. So she said that she does not want to remember the address and does not want to get these things back to her small rented house because she had the narrow table drawer where she kept her belongings, and says resolved to forget the address. So immediately she resolved to forget the address. That means she decided to forget the address given by her mother, and it was Marconi Street number 46, and says of all the things I had to forget, that would be the easiest. So she decided to forget the address as well as thinking of those things which she once had a connection with her mother. So this is the end of the chapter, The Address, written by Marga Minko from class 11 CBSE. So I hope you like the video. For more informative videos, do subscribe my channel, hit the bell icon so that you get notified whenever new video will be uploaded. So thank you so much for watching once again. Stay safe, stay healthy.